Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Andrew Lazaga, and I'll be your host for this special episode of the Dubcast with Dubside. Today, it is my pleasure to be chatting with author, kayak historian, and traditional kayak builder Harvey Golden. Harvey is a world expert on traditional skin-on-frame kayaks of the Arctic and has extensively documented the existing museum specimens of Arctic kayaks in two massive books, Kayaks of Greenland and Kayaks of Alaska. He has been heavily involved in Qajaq USA and was one of the first foreigners to compete in the Greenland National Kayaking Championships. His legendary collection of kayak replicas are on display at the Lincoln Street Kayak Museum in Portland, Oregon. Harvey, thanks so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Sure, thank you.
So when I first started building skin-on-frame kayaks, I was heavily inspired by your work. And I loved following your projects as you posted pictures of them on the Kayak USA forum. And it was always exciting to see what new kayaks you would bring to Sticks every spring. And it wasn't uncommon that wherever I went, people would see me with my skin-on-frame kayak and ask me, "Do you know Harvey Golden?" So your reputation traveled far. So how did you first become interested in traditional kayaks?
It was kind of I guess a lucky accident. I had dropped out of college and moved in with my folks. They lived just a block up from the Columbia River, and I wanted to have a boat to explore the area. I've always kind of enjoyed just poking around on creeks and rivers, in canoes or inner tubes or whatever. But I wanted a kayak. They appealed to me just because of their size and their lightness compared to a big Coleman canoe, the type I grew up with. But I didn't have the money to buy one. So I borrowed a friend's video cassette on how to build a Greenland kayak. And I built my first kayak from that.
What video was that?
It was by Bob Boucher. And it was done probably in the, maybe around 1985 or maybe late 80s. I built mine in 1993.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the first thing I'd ever built out of wood. It was also the first kayak I'd ever been in.
Wow. So how did it turn out?
It was absolutely horrible. It was extremely tippy. It was pretty unusable. I mean, I didn't have anything to compare it with, but when I couldn't let go of the dock or the paddle bracing on the bottom, I figured that's what a tippy kayak was. But it was the only boat I had, so I ballasted it with milk jugs full of water, and that made it a bit more usable. And I just kept playing around with it, getting the hang of using it. And soon I was paddling across the Columbia River without ballast. So it was kind of like riding a bike. Every bike's tippy at first, but with a bit of practice, it becomes easy.
So did you end up building another one and another one, trying to improve the design?
Yeah, the next boat I built was from the same design, and I built it for my mother. And I definitely made it a bit wider with a flatter bottom. The sizing in the video was proportional to your body, and I was an extremely thin person back then. So I ended up with, I think, like a 19-inch wide boat that was very deep and had quite a bit of dead rise in the bottom. But the second one was much more comfortable, and I was able to go paddling with my mom, which was lovely.
Did you ever use the Chris Cunningham book and the Robert Morris book on skin-on-frame kayak building?
No. Those came out later. Actually, those two that I built from the video cassette were the only ones I ever built from instructions. After those, I was into building replicas. But yeah, I think around the very early 2000s, maybe the late 1990s, a whole slew of books came out with instructions on how to build a variety of traditional kayak designs. And those were two of the more prominent ones.
So how did you get into building the replicas then?
Well, I had a copy of Howard Chappell's The Bark Canoes and Skin Boats of North America, and it has a section in the back with the skin boat section showing kayaks from across the Arctic, from Siberia to East Greenland. And I was just in awe at the variety of shapes and sizes, and I just found them fascinating. And I think at about the same point I picked up David Zimmerle's book, Kayak, that was, I think, a large pamphlet for an exhibit at Alaska State Museums. And it also had scale drawings of Arctic kayaks, and I built my first replica from Zimmerle's book.
What have you been able to learn from building the replicas?
Wow. The learning I get from for building replicas is in many different aspects and areas. A lot of them is how do you shape wood or get wood to turn into a shape that you see in an old scale drawing of an original hunting kayak. How do you achieve these forms, with wood, which is pretty complex three-dimensional thinking, getting
Hmm.
flat pieces of wood to conform to complex shapes. But just by trial and error, you can figure that out. Also, you look at a scale drawing, and it's inevitable that your mind will try to infer about what it would be like on the water. And many times I have built a replica with certain expectations that have actually been proven to be completely wrong, that the boat performs much differently than I had thought. So it's a way to, I guess, to check yourself, for your thinking about what a kayak will do versus actually using it. Because I mean, that by using a kayak, that's how you really get to learning.
Hmm. Over time, have you been able to better predict what a kayak would behave like from the drawings?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. I think it's certainly honed my intuition on certain design types, but there's always exceptions or certain nuances that I didn't anticipate. So yeah, I mean, it's still always a new experience actually getting in one and seeing what it actually does.
Let's talk about your book, Kayaks of
Hmm.
Greenland. So, the full title, Kayaks of Greenland: The History and Development of the Greenlandic Hunting Kayak, 1600 to 2000. So, it covers trends and variations of kayaks over 400 years. It's a beautifully illustrated book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
How did you come up with the idea of writing the book?
Wow. Essentially, in my quest to get lines drawings and build a variety of replicas just to better understand the kayaks, I started corresponding with people that had written about them and published line drawings. John Heath, Eugene Arima, and John Brand in particular. They were surprised that I was building some of the kayaks that they had surveyed, including 23-foot long kayaks that are 15 and 3/4 inches wide. I think from one of Eugene Arima's drawings, I think he probably thought I must be nuts to build such a boat, but I did and enjoyed the kayak very, very much. And I should also say, having started off with a very tippy boat and learning how to use it helped me realize that I could use something that was, even narrower and even tippier. But yeah, these mentors, as they all became, encouraged me to start going to museums and looking at originals because they said that there were many that no one had looked at before or given serious study to. So in 1998, I went on my first research trip to England, Scotland, and the Netherlands and surveyed 24 kayaks, I think. And just by virtue of where I was going, it was inevitable that nearly all of them were going to be from Greenland because those countries participated quite actively in whaling
Hmm.
in the Davis Straits in the 1600s through the 1700s and into the 1800s. So most of the Greenland kayaks I saw were from that period. There was only one of those 24 that was not from Greenland. It was from Lancaster Sound in North Baffin Island, just across the straits from Greenland.
What was John Heath like? Did you meet John Heath?
Yeah, yeah, yes, I did. He was very, very nice, friendly, friendly guy. He was very helpful, very hospitable. I visited him, I think, a couple times down in Texas, and first met him up in Seattle at a kayak symposium that he was speaking at.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that?
Oh gosh, that must have been 1999, I think. I remember Maligyak was there. That was when I met Maligyak, and Maligyak was 16 years old. So someone with better math skills than me could figure that out.
I've always wondered what the process is for taking the lines off of a kayak and transferring them to paper. Would you be able to describe that process?
Yes, yeah, it's it would be a huge understatement to say it's very complicated, and just the missing of one critical measurement can throw off everything and make your visit worthless. But essentially, it's the taking of a whole series of measurements, heights and breadths at a certain distance, like from a wall or from the tip of the kayak, and recording all these in great detail to the point where once you get home, you can plot them out, at XYZ axis into a scale drawing. It's a lot more complicated than I just made it sound, especially when one considers that a lot of these kayaks, actually most of them, are not in pristine condition. I've seen some 400-year-old kayaks, and even ones collected in the mid 20th century can be seriously damaged, in one way or another from handling or poor storage or cycling humidity. So there's a lot of other complicating factors. But essentially, it's just mapping it out every few inches, taking measurements.
How did you learn how to take the lines off of a kayak? Is that something that you had to come up with on your own?
Not entirely. It's a very similar process to lifting the lines off of a drawing. So when I work from a small drawing in a book to build a replica, I use dividers, and I essentially take the lines right off that. It's just a flat piece of paper instead of an actual three-dimensional object. And by taking off all those numbers, I can draw it again full size on butcher paper. So I have a full size drawing that I'm working from. So it's pretty much the same process, just working from the drawing to a full size kayak that I'm building versus from an artifact to a drawing. And by building many replicas, it taught me very quickly how to, I shouldn't say how to, but what to look for in a kayak, what needs measuring, and how to take all the measurements off an actual kayak. It taught me what information to gather.
Did you meet much resistance from museums and being able to access their collections? And how did you ask for permission to do that?
Oh, well, my first trip was in '98, and I sent letters. I don't know if anyone remembers letters to a whole bunch of museums throughout Scotland, England, and the Netherlands, and I just waited for responses. I told them what I was interested in. I told them the basic requirements that I would need in order to make the trip worthwhile, and just waited to hear back to see if they were okay with that and if they could facilitate my visit. And I got wonderful response. I forget how many museums I visited, but there were 24 kayaks surveyed on that trip over 3 months. But yeah, I got very good reception. Some of the survey visits were, well, I should say everyone is different. You're not always going to get the most ideal situation for measuring. Some kayaks might be hanging up 10 feet in the air, and you have to work with that, or have to climb into a glass case that's like on exhibit during open hours to do it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when you walk into a museum that has said yes, there's still unforeseen situations, including the condition of the kayak, which can really affect the survey time and what methods I use.
How long does it usually take to survey a kayak?
Gosh, again, that's highly variable, but for a basic West Greenland kayak with maybe 3 or 4 deck fittings, probably about 2 hours at the most. Yeah, for like a 3-hole bidarka with 8 chines and 3 cockpits, probably more like 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the replica building then. How many kayak replicas would you say you've built so far?
I think it's about 90 right now.
Wow. And after building all these replicas and seeing all the variations and construction techniques, haven't you been tempted to produce your own design, like a kayak that would combine all the best features?
Yeah, I actually get asked that question often, and the answer is a resounding no way. Yeah, no, I don't have any interest in that personally. I find replicas more interesting than anything I could do, and I also see the original builders as the true experts. And I'm really curious to kind of follow as close as I can the path they chose to pursue the hunting and subsistence that they did. Because I try not to lose a sense that these were hunting tools. Every kayak was a hunting tool. And we have very different reasons for building kayaks in our culture, mostly, entirely recreation. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different thing there. And I'm just not curious about what what a good modern recreational kayak would be like.
Has anyone ever asked you to build a kayak replica for them or bought one from you?
Yeah, I have. I used to do occasional commissions. I don't think I've sold one in 10 years, but yeah, that's how I paid for my early research trips, is unloading them. And also, that's also how I made room in my house for more. But yeah, but I don't do that anymore. I recommend other people for that. I think mostly I've talked people into doing it themselves. Mm-hmm. They'll save a lot of money and they'll learn a lot and be I think more satisfied with it ultimately. I'm also right now hanging on to all my replicas.
Wow.
Yeah, I have no interest in selling anything. So, yeah.
Well, that gets us into the topic of your kayak museum then.
Yes, yeah.
So at some point, you must have run out of room to store all these kayaks.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I kind of thought it would be an interesting thing to have a place where one could see all these designs together. I've surveyed over 230 kayaks in museums around the world, which is mostly, lower North America and Europe, where most of these are. I've never been charged to go into a museum to do research, so I thought, this is a way to kind of give back to society. But also, of the 230 kayaks I've surveyed, maybe only 10% of these were even on exhibit in museums. So there's not a lot of museums you can go to actually see a traditional kayak.
Hmm.
And I thought this can be, it could be remedied by a large collection of replicas. So that's kind of what I did.
When did you start the museum?
Oh, I think it was about 10 years ago. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm a bit rough on dates, but and I should be very upfront about this. Another aspect of the museum was that I have a major storage problem, so it solved that too. So
Yeah. Okay. So in 1999, Kayak USA received an invitation from Qajaq to participate in the 2000 Greenland National Kayaking Championships in Nuuk.
mhm, mhm.
And you attended along with Greg Stamer and Cindy Cole. So how did you end up attending that?
I'm not even sure I knew about Kayak USA back then. I think it was just kind of in the early formation.
Okay.
I think Greg Stamer was kind of heading up the organization. I didn't meet Greg until showing up at Nuke. I think I must have corresponded with him before that, but I think I mostly was going there to survey kayaks at the Greenland National Museum, and it turned out to just be a very fortuitous thing that the championships were happening there, and that I was able to participate. So it was just kind of I guess a synchronicity.
You must have prepared though for
Yes,
the
I
competition.
I certainly knew I was going, and knew I was going to be participating. Yeah, and I trained a lot. I was never much of a racer. I'm very proudly a very slow pokey paddler who has no interest in going fast. But I was quite interested in the kayak rolling, and when Maligiak visited, we did a lot of rolling together, and
Oh,
I
okay.
learned a lot about that, and also studied the videos put out by John Heath that showed rolling, and I practiced a lot of that as well.
I guess there weren't a lot of resources available for learning at the time, so you basically taught yourself a lot of the competition roles.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And those were from old VHS cassettes.
Hmm.
And I had previously taught myself how to roll from actually a drawing that John Heath did in the Chappelle book.
Oh, wow. What was
Yeah.
that? What
And
was that like?
it was miserable. It involved a lot of swimming around in my life jacket, but
Yeah.
I did learn how to do it. Yeah, I taught myself out at Boston Harbor near Olympia,
Uh-huh.
and actually coincidentally, I later found out from John that that's where he used to go practice rolling, and that's where he worked out the rolls for that drawing that he did. That was kind of another another amazing coincidence. But
Wow, really?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
John Heath practiced rolling in Boston Harbor in Olympia?
Yeah, he used to paddle out of Boston Harbor. That's what he told me.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that he lived in Washington. I thought he
Oh
was from
yeah, yeah.
Texas.
No, he's definitely from Texas, but yeah, no, he lived in Seattle for many years, just off Seward Park, and yeah, he was an engineer, I think, for Boeing,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, and I think also the brewery company, if I remember correctly. But
Hmm.
yeah, he definitely has Seattle connections.
Yeah, I paddle out of Boston Harbor all the time.
It's a
Yeah, it's
lovely
cool.
spot. Yeah.
When you went to the competition, you built your own kayak while you were there.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
How did that turn out? What was that like?
Uh, well, it was a bit of success and failure. I had a replica of a kayak at home that I really liked. It was a copy of one that I saw in Holland on my '98 trip. But shipping a full size kayak to Greenland is cost prohibitive, if not impossible. So what I did is I built a second one, the frame of a second one, and then I took it over to the bandsaw after taking it apart again, and cut long slash cuts through the gunnels and the chines and the keel, all the long parts, so it would fit into a small cardboard box. And chucked all the ribs in a cardboard box and just mailed them over there with a hunk of nylon. And thought, if I bring a bottle of glue with me, I could probably get it in the water in about 2 days, 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
And that's what I did. It showed up, and when I wasn't doing research at the museum, I was gluing the boat back together.
Wow.
It had marks of indexing the scarf joint so it would all turn out right. And the main problem is the paint I used to seal the boat. It was an oil-based enamel, and the weather in Greenland it was not very conducive to drying. So to this day, I have paint all over my dry suit from an uncured paint on the kayak I used in the competition.
So, what do you think makes a good rolling kayak design?
I have no idea. I really don't. Yeah, I mean, I roll a lot of Greenland kayaks, but I also roll Alaskan kayaks, some of which are 28 inches wide and like twice as deep as Greenland kayaks, and they roll fine too. I don't pad them out or anything. I mean, people seem to be obsessed with stuffing them full of foam, but none of that's really needed to do rolls, and it wasn't traditionally done either. So I really don't know. I don't think it's really the kayak so much. It's got to be at least 95% the person doing it. And I think 95% of the person is believing that you can do it too. So, I mean, a lot of it's just trust. I really have no ideas or opinion about rollability.
Okay. How did your experience attending the competition and participating in the competition differ from your expectations?
I don't know. I don't even really recall having expectations one way or another. I was much more focused on research there. But to go from 1 hour looking at a 300 or 400-year-old kayak in the Greenland National Museum to literally stepping outside of the door of the museum and seeing the bay full of Greenlanders today still using these boats, kids of all ages, men and women, boys and girls, that was a really profound experience. And I think that really, gosh, I'm not even sure I could articulate it, but I mean, that was obviously a very powerful thing for me to see because most of my research is in museums, not talking to people from the culture. The people in the museums don't always know much about the kayaks, and neither do I, to be honest, until I really see it or read about it. But it really brought it to life and showed me that these are very much living objects to this day. And there's obviously a major source of pride for Greenlanders.
What did you think of the modern Greenland kayaks? How did those differ from the museum specimens?
They were very, very interesting to me. I think I surveyed one of the modern rolling kayaks that's in my book. It's just very interested in how these progress. I mean, I guess without that, my book would have been, from 1600 to 1984. But, I was able to bring it up to the 21st century with these rolling kayaks. The innovation is still there, and they're modifying them to fit their needs, much like the hunters did 3, 4, 5, 600 years ago. So it's still very much a living thing. And I met Greenlanders that still hunt from their kayaks. It's mostly sport hunting. It's not subsistence at all. And you got to see how these kayaks were adapted to carrying a 22 rifle out and what hunting equipment they had. It's much different than 50 years ago, but it was still very interesting to see.
What did they hunt?
I think they were shooting seal, and they had, I think, like 22 rifles and like a line with a steel hook on it. I don't remember what other equipment they had. I also had qualms about taking the lines off people's boats. It is invasive. There's a lot of issues and ethical concerns about that. I mean, one can say there is about doing that with a 400-year-old boat as well. So I'm trying to be mindful about that as well.
Were they open to you taking lines off their kayak, or were they a little suspicious of?
I only asked about one kayak,
Uh-huh.
and I think it was through Maligiak. I think he was one of the builders of that, if I'm remembering properly. But I asked the owner builder of it, and he said it was okay. And it was a rolling kayak, one that I was specifically interested in, and I didn't inquire about any other kayaks. But the kayaks I saw were beautiful and from all over West Greenland, and some of the nuances of design from the northern end or the southern end were still evident in these kayaks, which was also kind of a beautiful thing to see, that they hadn't been totally, fallen into one design form, that they were still using the local forms.
One of the big differences in modern skin on frame construction, of course, is the skin.
Yes. Yeah,
And
that's the biggest.
yeah, so people have come up with all different kinds of ways to do it. But what do you like to do for the skin?
I've been using a 12-ounce nylon with just hardware store varnish, just an oil-based polyurethane. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I've been happy with that. But yes, I mean that is the largest material substitute, and it's by no means a small one. I've been studying the carpentry of these boats since the mid '90s, but have never had any experience with the skins. But a few years ago, I did cover one of my replicas with deer skin. That was a very, very eye-opening experience. The first time I actually had experience working with actual skins.
Wow.
They're different than seal skin. They have other differences, but it was very eye-opening experience.
How did you get the deer skin, and what was that like?
Well, it wasn't as adventurous and gruesome as you might think. I went down to Oregon Leather and purchased 5 parchment hides.
Okay.
So already scraped and dried and stretched. But yeah, so I got off easy there. But the processing was very, very interesting and difficult. It would have been like a 2.5-hour sewing job for me, but this took 10 hours and a lot of broken needles and a lot of swearing and a lot of my blood. Yeah, I'm sure the deer went through worse, but it was a very, very interesting experience. And I got to try out a bunch of the different types of stitching methods I'd seen described in books and also had seen on original kayaks. And yeah, it was amazing. And it turned out seaworthy, but I compare it to the kayaks I see in museums, and it's probably the worst sewing job I've ever seen.
I'm sure you have a new appreciation for how they stitch them together.
Definitely, definitely. And I'm actually I've recently been thinking about doing it again. I'd like to give it another shot. But yeah, just the lining up skins can be difficult. But yeah.
What do you mean by processing the skin? Is it when you purchase it, is it stiff?
Yeah, it's just like it's like a thick vellum or
Okay.
even like cheap plastic. I mean, most of the processing was done by whoever, tanned the hides. There's a large, extensive method of getting sealskins ready for being put on a kayak, but I didn't have to deal with most of that. What I did have to do was soak the skins and get them wet. So these skins may weigh a few ounces, and I threw them in my pond for a few hours, and they soak up water, and they come out weighing many, many pounds,
Huh.
just dripping wet, and they feel like rubber, and they stretch quite a bit more when you're pulling them around a frame. It's very hard to get needles through them until they've dried out a certain amount, but not too much. And there's a lot of varying thickness in deer skin too, which complicated the sewing as well. I was trying to do the blind stitching that I see in the sealskin ones, and I was able to do that in certain areas, but not in other areas. But yeah, I mean, I learned a lot, but it was difficult and miserable. Yeah, yeah.
When you finally have it stitched on and it dries off, how does it differ from the nylon in terms of weight and in terms of how watertight it is?
Yeah, I think generally these deer skins are about the same weight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, seal skin I think would be a bit heavier because it has, I think, generally a more uniform thickness. The deer skin is a lot thicker along the spine, so I think roughly about the same as nylon. These deer skin, but seal skin I think would be a bit heavier yet. In terms of the waterproofness, I had to waterproof the skins because if I just stuck it in the water, just being bare rawhide, it would soak up the water and get real rubbery, and the threads could tear through the skin, and it would open up and leak. So I had to oil it before using it, and I used snow seal, what you put on leather boots before you go skiing, and that rendered it pretty waterproof. Some of the seams opened up as it dried, mostly on deck, but I just packed more snow seal in there, and that seemed to seal it up pretty good.
Wow. Interesting. How many deer cover a kayak?
I deliberately picked a very short, narrow kayak to do this, so I wouldn't have to use so many. I used 5 deer skins. 4 of them covered the length, and there were some spots where it didn't close up on deck, so I needed a fifth one to patch in. And that's the exact similar patterns that you see on sealskin covered ones. Is you have to join a bunch of them end to end, of course, to get the length, and then it takes pieces to patch up where they don't reach across.
So you mentioned that you were thinking about trying it again. What would you do differently next time?
One, I would do it in the summer, so my hands aren't numb the whole time. And I think thinking maybe a different type of skin might be better. I need to do more research on this, like maybe elk. I don't know if it has the same thickness variations or if it's thicker in general. I had a friend that did a cowhide one, which is extremely thick. Yeah, I don't think I'd use that, but yeah, I was just curious to just learn a bit more about that. The first time was fascinating, but I think I can do it better again.
How do you prevent it from shrinking over time? Or
Essentially, you don't unless you can keep it in a very temperature and moisture controlled environment. And this is the same issue you see with real kayaks in museums, especially older ones. The cycling of the skins can cause the skins to shrink such that either the skin breaks, or if the frame isn't stronger than the skins, the frame breaks. So the skins won't break, but they will crush the frame.
hmm
So that's one of the things I run into when I look at original kayaks in museums is the cycling of the skins, whether it takes the frame or the skin.
Okay. My understanding is that the skin was taken off regularly during the winter,
That's right. Hmm.
every year or two.
Exactly.
Is that what you would do for something like this?
If I was to keep using the boat and I depended on the boat for my livelihood for subsistence hunting, I would have to. Essentially, I've just made a one-off, and it will go the way that originals do in museums. It's already showing some signs of the hull being collapsed a little bit towards the stern.
hmm
So I should say that that's one aspect of the research I find really interesting is building replicas with the same scantlings. Is I see how they degrade or fall apart, and it's often very much the same way I see in originals in museums. So that also helps in my interpretation of a broken kayak to see how it may have looked, or I mean, that's all conjectural interpretations, but it keeps me a bit more informed about how they break or why they break or where they break.
Yeah, I imagine that they were probably constantly repaired.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you take your skin off every year, you can repair something that's broken. You can make an adjustment to something that you didn't like the first time. So they're constantly repairing them. And one of the more fascinating things I see in kayaks and museums is evidence of the recycling of parts or repairs or adjustments. And they're all evident in kayaks. Sometimes you see mortises where there aren't deck beams now, but there used to be. I've even seen parts of kayaks that actually had once been part of a sled.
Oh,
So
wow.
they also recycle other material. And much of the Arctic wood was not a common thing, so you'd had to be very, very, very careful about wasting it, and so you would recycle it into sleds for the winter or kayaks during the summer months.
Have you done that with any of your own replicas, or built a kayak and said you didn't like it and took it apart, reused the pieces, or reskinned
No,
them?
if one of my replicas is falling apart enough, I'll take it apart and I'll recycle the parts. I'll use them in newer kayaks, but I've never made modifications to any of my replicas. The point being that they are replica,
Yeah,
so
right.
I don't want to change them too much. Yeah, it's actually with Greenland kayak that I've actually had to change the design a bit, which I don't like doing, but I have to do it just so I can fit in them. I'm a pretty small guy, but some of the cockpits are just impossibly short, so I have lengthened a few cockpits just so I can fit in them, and that's mostly moving the back of the cockpit back further because you kind of sit towards the front in the Greenland kayak. So, but yeah, I keep all the original design from the shear line down, just so I can be sure I'm understanding the proper design instead of something I just came up with.
So what's next for you? What projects are you working on now?
Oh, I've been building Canadian Inuit kayaks like crazy. I built gosh, probably 8 or 9 in the last few years. I'm working on a book on Inuit kayaks from Canada.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's it's kind of the obvious volume 3. I've also since been surveying any other kayaks I can on research trips. So there'll probably be a volume 4 that's a roundup of Greenland kayaks and Alaskan kayaks that I've seen since those books have come out.
Wow. So there are more specimens out there for you to survey.
I have a list of 600.
Amazing.
Yeah. I think I got my work cut out for me.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. One last question. How can people find you on the internet and get copies of your books?
Okay, both through traditionalkayaks.com.
It's good to see that copies of your books are still available.
Yes. During the pandemic, my research was cut off completely, of course, and I thought, well, now's a good time to reprint Kayaks of Greenland that had gone out of print for a couple of years. So I'm well stocked on Alaska and Greenland.
One copy was available on Amazon for over $300.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm very, very proud to say that wasn't me selling that. Yeah, no. They're back to their usual prices. No price increase. And yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely have to make my way down there sometime to see your collection.
Sure. Yeah, it's by appointment, but I can get you in anytime if I'm around. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks so much, Harvey. And thanks so much to all of our listeners. I just want to let everyone know that this episode wraps up the Dubcast with Dubside for 2022. And we'll be taking a break for the holidays. So on behalf of Dubside and myself, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all.